He built an empire on silence and fear. She built a life on lies and love. 8 years apart, one impossible face, and the whole world cracked open. If you've been waiting for a story that hits you somewhere you forgot you had, this is it. Watch until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The snow came in sideways that Thursday morning. The kind of wet, heavy Montana snow that didn't drift so much as collapse. Thick curtains of white pressing down on Silver Creek, like the sky had finally run out of patience. Claire Bennett scraped her windshield with a busted ice scraper. The handle cracked at the grip, her breath coming out in quick white puffs. She'd been meaning to replace it for 2 winters. She hadn't. That was how most things worked in her life. Not broken enough to fix, not whole enough to stop noticing. "Mom, I can't find my left boot." She didn't turn around. "It's behind the dryer, Noah." "How do you know?" "Because that's where it always is." A pause. Then the slap of small feet retreating back into the house. Claire went back to scraping. The scraper caught the edge of a crack in the windshield she also hadn't fixed, and she pressed harder than she should have. The glass held. Everything held most of the time. That was the deal she'd made with herself 8 years ago when she packed a single bag, drove 16 hours north and west, and landed in a town so small it didn't show up on most maps. You keep moving. You keep it together. You don't look back. Noah reappeared at the door wearing one boot and a look of total betrayal. "It's wet. Put a plastic bag over your sock first." "That's disgusting. That's winter." She finally turned and looked at him, really looked, the way she sometimes caught herself doing when he wasn't paying attention. 8 years old. Dark hair that curled a little behind the ears when it got long, which she always let go a week too long because she couldn't bring herself to cut it. Eyes so dark they looked almost black in low light, and so direct it made grown adults uncomfortable. Not her eyes. Nothing about him was her eyes. She'd learned to live with that. Noah disappeared back inside, muttering. Claire exhaled and looked up at the mountain ridge that cupped the north end of Silver Creek. The peaks were invisible behind cloud. This was the 3rd storm in 2 weeks, and the school board had already floated the idea of canceling the winter book fair that the library committee had spent 4 months organizing. If they canceled it, Mrs. Paulson would spiral into what Noah called one of her word tornadoes, and Claire would spend her lunch break talking the woman down from the ceiling. She loved this town. She had chosen it for reasons that had nothing to do with love, and it had become one anyway. That was the other deal she'd made. Let it in, slowly, carefully, the way you let heat back into frostbitten fingers. Not fast, never fast. Fast was how you got hurt again. They made it to school 11 minutes late, Noah's boot only half dry, Claire's coffee cooling in the cup holder because she'd forgotten to drink it. He jumped out of the car before she fully stopped, backpack swinging, and turned long enough to say, "You have yard duty today," with an expression that suggested he found this mildly embarrassing. Then he ran. She watched him go through the chain-link gate, past the mural of the Silver Creek hawk that the 4th graders repainted every spring, and disappear into the building. She sat there an extra 30 seconds. She always did. Then she parked and went to work. The book fair setup was scheduled for 2 o'clock, which meant that from 8 to 2, Claire was running 3rd grade reading groups, mediating a conflict between 2 boys over a pencil case, covering a 20-minute chunk of 2nd grade while Mrs. Yee had a migraine, and eating half a granola bar over the sink in the staff bathroom because there wasn't time for an actual lunch. By 1:30, she'd corralled 4 parent volunteers and was stacking boxed books in the gymnasium when Principal Donovan appeared at the double doors looking like he'd swallowed something sideways. "We have a situation," he said. "What kind?" "A donor situation." He was already walking and expected her to follow, which she did, because that was also how things worked. "The Knox Foundation. You know them?" She didn't. She said so. Anonymous philanthropic organization out of the East Coast. They contacted the district 3 months ago about a major book donation. We're talking $40,000 in children's literature, classroom sets, bilingual editions, the works. No strings, no press, no naming rights. The agreement was they'd send a representative to oversee the delivery and make sure the books went where they were supposed to go. "That sounds fine," Claire said. Their representative arrived this morning. And? Donovan stopped walking. He was a broad man with a gray beard and the general energy of someone who had seen many things in 20 years of school administration and retained the capacity to be surprised by almost none of them. Right now, he looked surprised. He arrived in a black Escalade, with 2 other black Escalades, and 4 men who are very large and very quiet and standing in the parking lot like they're guarding something. Claire processed this. How large? Claire. I'm asking a practical question. Large, he said firmly. The representative himself he's polite, seems genuine, knows the books, knows what they're for. But the men outside are not school fair volunteers. I don't know what they are. Do you want me to talk to him? You run the library committee. The books are for your library, and you're better at people than I am. He said this last part without embarrassment, which was one of the things she respected about him. His name is Knox. First name? That's all I was given. She found him in the library. He was standing at the far end of the room with his back to the door, looking at the shelves, the gaps between books, the water stain on the ceiling tile that maintenance had been promising to fix since October, the reading corner with its mismatched beanbags and the hand-lettered sign Noah's class had made. Books take you places. He was wearing a dark coat, no tie, and he was very still in the way that certain kinds of men learn to be still. Not relaxed, but controlled. Like stillness was a decision he made constantly, deliberately, so that nothing leaked out. Claire had been around enough difficult people to recognize the posture. She'd grown up watching it. She'd once loved it. She killed that thought and crossed the room. Mr. Knox. He turned. The floor did not drop out from under her feet. She was proud of that later, that her body did not betray her in the first half-second, that she kept her face still, that her hands didn't flinch, that the granola bar she'd eaten stayed where it was supposed to. All of that, she managed. What she could not manage was the half-breath she lost before she found the next one, and she was almost certain he saw it. Adrian Knox looked exactly the same. That was the cruelest part. 8 years, and whatever machine had produced the face she'd spent a decade trying to forget was still running at full capacity. The sharp jaw, the dark eyes that took in a room the way a camera takes in light, the slight downward pull at the corner of his mouth that wasn't a frown, wasn't unhappiness, was just the default position of a man who did not offer his expressions freely. He was older. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there. He wore it well, and she hated that, and she hated that she noticed it. He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds before something shifted behind his eyes, a door opening on a room he thought he'd sealed permanently, and then he said her name. Not loudly, not urgently, just Claire. Mr. Knox. Flat, deliberate, a wall assembled in 2 syllables. I'm the library coordinator. I oversee the book program. I wanted to introduce myself and thank you in person for the donation. He was still looking at her the way a man looks at something he's been told doesn't exist. You're teaching here? I am. In Silver Creek? That's where we are, yes. Claire, the books are being unloaded into the gymnasium right now, she said. We've organized a sorting system by reading level and genre, and I can walk you through our distribution plan if you'd like to see how the collection will be integrated into the... Stop. He said it quietly, and it still landed like a hand on a table. Not aggressive, just absolute. The kind of stop that meant he wasn't doing this, wasn't playing the role she'd assigned him in the script she was writing out loud as fast as she could. How long have you been here? That's not relevant to the book program. Claire, please don't do that. Do what? Say my name like that. The silence that followed was the specific silence of 2 people standing 3 feet apart, with 8 years of accumulated wreckage between them, and neither one willing to be the first to touch it. He looked away first, looked at the shelves again, jaw working once. When he looked back, his face had closed down slightly. Not gone, but managed. She recognized that too. I'll look at your distribution plan, he said. Show me. She showed him. She was professional and thorough, and she did not once let her voice do anything it wasn't supposed to do, and she watched him listen with the careful attention of a man who had not come here to look at a distribution plan, but who was giving her the distance she'd demanded without being asked twice. She had always given him credit for that, in the old days. The ability to read a room. The ability to know when to push and when to step back. She had tried over the years to reduce her memories of him to flaws. It worked partially. The flaws were real, but so was the rest of it. They were walking back through the gymnasium, past stacks of boxed books, and the two parent volunteers who kept glancing at Adrian's coat and then pretending they hadn't, when Noah came through the side door at a dead run, backpack half off, having apparently convinced his teacher that helping with the book fair counted as an educational activity. He had a box in his arms that was clearly too heavy for him, and he was too stubborn to admit it, and Claire opened her mouth to tell him to put it down before he dropped it on his foot. Adrian moved first, not fast, not dramatically. He just stepped to the side, put a hand under the bottom of the box before it tipped, and held it steady while Noah regained his grip. It was a practical gesture, efficient, automatic, the kind of thing anyone might do. But Adrian didn't let go right away. He held the box for one extra second and looked down at Noah with an expression Claire had never seen on his face before, and her stomach went to ice. Noah looked up. "Thanks." "Heavy box," Adrian said. His voice was perfectly even. "I knew I had it." "Sure you did?" Noah squinted at him with the particular assessment that 8-year-olds applied to adults they weren't sure about yet. "Are you the book guy?" "I'm the book guy." "We needed more books in the leveled reader section. The ones we had were too easy for me." "What level are you?" Noah told him. Adrian nodded like this was a real answer to a real question, and Claire watched his eyes move over Noah's face with the careful, contained devastation of a man doing math he hadn't prepared himself to do, arriving at an answer he wasn't ready for, and keeping every bit of it below the surface. He was good at control. He always had been. He was not good enough for this. She could see it, the precise moment the calculation completed, the precise moment his eyes found the things in Noah's face that she had been living with for 8 years. The jaw, the eyes, the way he held his head slightly to the left when he was thinking. She told herself for so long that no one would ever see it, that she'd chosen a place remote enough and changed enough about her life that the question would never come up, that Noah was hers and only hers in every way that mattered. She had not accounted for him standing 3 feet away in a gymnasium in Montana. Adrian straightened up. He did not look at her, and that was how she knew he was working very, very hard to keep it together. He said to Noah, "I'll make sure they include some harder ones in the next shipment." And Noah said, "Cool," and ran off to find Mrs. Paulson, and the gymnasium went about its business around them. And Claire felt the ground she'd spent 8 years building shift underneath her like the first tremor of something that had been building in the deep dark for a very long time. "Claire." Adrian's voice was low, under the noise of the room. "Don't." Her own voice came out steadier than she deserved. "Not here. Not now." He turned to look at her then, and his face was the face of a man who had spent the last 10 seconds having the entire architecture of his understanding rearranged and was now standing in the rubble deciding what to do next. What she saw there wasn't anger, wasn't accusation, not yet. It was something rawer and harder to look at than either of those things. "When?" he said. "I don't know." "Claire, I said I don't know." She met his eyes for the first time since the library, and she made herself hold it. "I need time." He looked at her for a long moment, and she had the sensation of being a calculation he was performing, the same way he'd looked at Noah, searching for the answer to something, and finding it, and not knowing what to do with the finding. "How much time?" he asked. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen out of reflex. It was a text from an unknown number, 4 words. "We know you're there." She looked up. Adrian was already reading her face. He'd been watching her expression when she saw the message, and whatever he saw in it made something go cold and still behind his eyes. "Who knows you're here?" he said. Not a question exactly. The phrasing of a man who already knew this wasn't about her. Her hand was steady as she turned the phone to show him. Adrian looked at the message for 2 seconds. Then he put 2 fingers to the earpiece she hadn't noticed until now and said, in a voice like gravel under pressure, "Pull the cars around. We have a problem." The text had come from a burner. Adrian knew it before he even finished reading it. The formatting, the timing, the deliberate absence of anything traceable. Whoever sent it wanted her to know they were watching, not to start a conversation. That was the specific cruelty of it. Not a threat with demands attached, just a fact, delivered like a cold hand on the back of the neck. He stepped away from Claire and spoke low into the earpiece. Donovan and Reeves stay on the perimeter. Carver comes inside. East entrance, now. Nobody moves the cars until I say. He waited for the confirmation click, then turned back. Claire had not moved. She was holding the phone against her side, screen down, and she was doing the thing she'd been doing since the moment she recognized him in the library, working very hard to look like she wasn't working hard at all. Her jaw was set. Her shoulders were level. But her breathing was wrong, too shallow and too controlled. And he'd spent enough years reading rooms and people to know the difference between calm and performed calm. "Give me the phone," he said. "No." "Claire, it's my phone." She looked up at him. "And you don't get to come in here and start running things. Someone is watching this building. I can see that." Her voice was quiet and absolutely flat. "I also notice you're not surprised." He held her gaze. "I'm not." That landed. He watched it land. The small tightening around her eyes. The fractional adjustment in the set of her mouth. She'd hoped on some level that it was random, that the message was noise, a wrong number, something disconnected from the man standing in front of her. He could see her recalculating. "How long have they been watching you?" she said. "I don't know that they've been watching me." "Then what are they watching?" He didn't answer, and that was its own answer. Claire looked away first, and he saw the moment she understood. Not the specifics, not yet, but the shape of it. That his arrival here had not been as invisible as he'd arranged it to be. That someone, somewhere in the chain of logistics that moved a man like him from one coast to the other, had let something slip, or had told someone deliberately. The gymnasium around them continued to function. Volunteers lifted boxes. A parent volunteer called across the room about where the picture books were supposed to go. Two kids chased each other between stacks of cartons, while a teacher tried half-heartedly to stop them. The ordinary machinery of a school afternoon, grinding along indifferent to the fact that the floor was not as solid as it looked. Carver appeared at the east door, 6'2", light on his feet for his size, wearing a jacket that didn't fit the setting at all but fit him perfectly. Adrian lifted his chin and Carver positioned himself at the edge of the room with his back to the wall in a clear line to every entrance. Claire glanced at him once, and her expression didn't change, but she moved half a step closer to the side entrance where the kids had gone, and Adrian noticed that too. She was positioning herself between his people and Noah. 8 years, and the instinct was automatic. "We need to talk," he said. "You think?" The edge in it was sharp enough to cut. "Yes, we do. But not here. Not while there are children in this building and your, whatever they are standing in my parking lot." She looked at him directly. "You're going to make this school a target." The text came before my cars were visible from this side of the building. She stopped. "What?" "Whoever sent that message knew you were here before they knew I was here. Think about that." He watched the color change in her face. Not pale. She wasn't the kind of woman who went pale easily, but something shifted, some underlying assumption cracked. She looked at the phone in her hand like it had changed shape. "That's not possible," she said, but she didn't sound like she believed it. "How long have you been in Silver Creek?" 7 years. Her voice had gone careful. "Same employer the whole time?" "Yes. What are you Same address?" "Adrian." She said his name for the first time, and it came out with gravel in it, something rough and involuntary, like the word had been wedged somewhere in her chest all afternoon and finally worked loose. "Stop interrogating me." "I'm not interrogating you. I'm trying to figure out how long you've been visible to someone before today." "I haven't been visible to anyone." The certainty in it had a defensive edge, not the certainty of someone who knew they were right, but the certainty of someone who needed very badly to be right. "I was careful. I have always been careful." "I know." He said it without heat. "I know you were careful. I looked for you for 4 years, Claire. I had people who are very good at finding people looking for you. You were gone." Something crossed her face at that. Quick, complicated, gone almost before it arrived. He couldn't read all of it, but part of it was surprise. He'd think about that later. Right now he needed her head in the room. So if it wasn't you being careless, he said, and it wasn't my people being sloppy, then someone already knew I was here. She said it quietly, like testing the weight of it. Before you came. Yes. The gymnasium had gotten louder around them, more kids filtering in after the final bell, the afternoon dissolving into the comfortable chaos of a school event. Carver was still against the wall. From outside, barely audible, came the sound of one of the Escalades repositioning. Claire looked around the room with new eyes, and he recognized the look. The specific recalibration that happened when the world you'd assembled carefully around yourself turned out to have a different architecture than you'd thought. I need to get Noah, she said. I'll come with you. You will not. Immediate. Hard. You will stay here, and you will not go near my son again. He didn't argue. She left the room quickly, but not running. Controlled, deliberate, the walk of a woman who refused to let her fear move faster than her feet. He watched her go and put 2 fingers to his earpiece again. Donovan, I need a trace on the number that sent the text to a local phone approximately 22 minutes ago. Route it through Carver. He paused and quietly canvassed the perimeter. If someone is watching this building, I want to know from where. By the time Claire came back with Noah, one hand on the boy's shoulder, Noah looking slightly put out at being collected early from what had apparently been a very good stack of adventure novels, Adrian had a partial answer. The number traced to a prepaid cell purchased in Billings 14 months ago. 14 months. Claire had been in Silver Creek for 7 years. Someone had acquired the ability to reach her phone more than a year before Adrian ever arrived in Montana. He told her in the hallway outside the gymnasium, where the noise from inside was enough to cover their voices. She listened without interrupting him, which was something he remembered about her. The capacity to receive bad information without flinching, to sit with it for the 3 or 4 seconds it took to actually process it, rather than reacting immediately. Most people reacted immediately. Claire had always been different. 14 months, she said. Yes. That means... She stopped. Looked at the middle distance. That means whoever this is, they weren't following you here. They found me on their own and then waited. Or they found you and then arranged for me to come here. She looked at him. What? The Knox Foundation donation was anonymous. The request to direct it to Silver Creek specifically came through the district liaison in Billings. I traced the original request this morning. It came from an address that doesn't exist. The hallway was empty except for the 2 of them, and Noah, who had apparently decided that the adults were doing something boring and was reading the back cover of a book he'd acquired somehow. Claire looked at her son for a moment, then looked back at Adrian. Someone set this up, she said. Someone brought you here. And made sure you knew I was coming. I didn't know you were coming. The text came before I got out of the car, he said. Someone wanted you scared before you ever saw me. Her eyes moved fast across his face, looking for the angle, looking for the part that served his interests, because she was not a woman who took anything at face value, especially not from him. He let her look. He had nothing to hide in this particular moment, and he needed her to see that. Who knows you well enough to use me against you? She said finally. That list has been getting shorter for the last 3 years. He paused. The people at the top of it are inside my own organization. She closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, they were flat and hard and certain. I'm not getting pulled into your world again. Claire, I left. I stayed gone. I built something here, and I am not... I know. He cut her off, not cruelly, but clean. I'm not asking you to. I'm telling you that someone else has already decided to pull you in. I'm just the vehicle they chose. Noah looked up from his book. Are you guys fighting? No, Claire said. It sounds like fighting. We're talking. About what? Adult things. She put a hand on his head briefly and steered him down the hallway. Go get your backpack. We're leaving in 5 minutes. Noah went, looking back once at Adrian with those dark, unreadable eyes, and Adrian looked back, and the math he'd done in the gymnasium 30 minutes ago was still there, still landed, still sitting in the center of his chest like something that had been dropped from a height. He said, without planning to say it, How old is he? It wasn't a question. Not really. The number was already there, assembled from everything his eyes had told him. The height, the face, the way the boy moved, the ease of him, the particular quality of that direct stare. Claire had gone very still. Claire. His voice had changed. He heard it change and couldn't stop it. How old is he? 8, she said. Barely audible. The hallway seemed to get narrower. His birthday, he said. Adrian, don't. When? She turned to face him, and her face was the face of a woman who had been holding a very heavy thing for a very long time and was now watching the moment she dreaded approach and finding that it looked exactly the way she'd always thought it would. Not explosive, not dramatic, just inevitable. March 14th, she said. He didn't need the year. He knew exactly where he was on March 14th, 9 years ago. He knew it the way you know the location of every scar, not because you look at it constantly, but because the body doesn't forget the place where it was changed. He put one hand on the wall, not for support exactly, more to establish that the wall was still there, that the hallway was still a physical object, that the world had not actually rearranged itself even though every internal structure he'd been maintaining for the last 8 years had just shifted on its foundations all at once. You knew, he said, when you left. You knew. I didn't know for certain until... Claire. I thought... She stopped, started again, and her voice was rough in a way he hadn't heard before. I thought you'd chosen someone else. I thought I was already gone to you. What was I supposed to do? Call? Send a letter? To a man who had just agreed to be engaged to the daughter of... I never agreed. You were photographed at the engagement dinner. Her voice cracked on the last word, not with grief, but with the specific anguish of an old wound that had calcified wrong. I saw the pictures. Your face. You were there, Adrian, in a suit at that table. What was I supposed to think? He had to breathe through what came up at that. Not anger, though anger was in it somewhere, but something more complicated and less manageable. He knew about the photographs. He'd found out about them 4 years after the fact when the investigator he'd hired finally pieced together the timeline of Claire's disappearance. The photographs had been released strategically. The morning after a dinner he'd attended under duress, in the middle of a negotiation he'd had no choice about, at a table he'd sat at because the alternative had been delivered to him in clear, unambiguous terms. The alternative had been Claire. He'd sat at that table because someone had told him, quietly, pleasantly, with the particular courtesy of a very confident threat, that if he refused the engagement, Claire Bennett would not survive the following week. He'd been trying to find a way to tell her that for 8 years. The engagement wasn't real, he said. Adrian, it was never real. I was at that dinner because they told me if I wasn't, you'd be dead by morning. He said it without dramatics, without inflection, because the fact of it still lived somewhere below the level of drama. It was just a thing that had happened, a calculation someone else had made that had split both their lives in half. I was trying to find a way out of it without getting you killed, and then you disappeared, and I had nothing left to protect, so I burned the whole thing down and spent the next 4 years looking for you. She stared at him. He waited. That's... She stopped. That's what you're saying. It's what happened. You could have found a way to tell me. You could have... I tried. The 2 words came out with more weight than he intended. Claire, I wrote letters. I had people deliver messages. Every single one came back marked undeliverable or simply vanished. I didn't know until 3 years ago that someone inside my own house had been intercepting them. Going back years, before you even left. The silence between them had changed character. It was no longer the silence of 2 people in opposition. It was heavier and stranger than that. The silence of 2 people who had each been living inside a story that turned out to have a different author than either of them had known. He watched her absorb it. He watched the thing she'd built the last 8 years. The righteous certainty of a woman who had been abandoned, the clean story of a man who had chosen power over love, begin to develop fractures. He did not feel good about that. The story had been wrong, but it had held her together, and he understood the cost of pulling a load-bearing lie out of the architecture of someone's survival. "Someone inside your organization," she said slowly. "Yes. They intercepted your letters. And mine from you, if you sent any." Her jaw worked. "I sent 4. I never received one." She exhaled. It was a long exhale, the kind that went all the way down, the kind that sounds like something finally giving up the fight to stay compressed. She put one hand against the wall on the opposite side of the hallway, mirroring him without meaning to, and they stood there like two pillars holding up opposite ends of the same collapsing bridge. "Noah doesn't know," she said. "I gathered that. You can't just—" "I know. He's not— This isn't—" She stopped. Tried again. "He's 8 years old, and he has a stable life, and I will not let you blow that apart because you showed up in a convoy of SUVs and—" "Claire." His voice was as level as he could make it. "Someone already knows he's here. That changes what's possible and what isn't. I need you to understand that." She looked at him for a long moment. Then Noah appeared at the end of the hallway with his backpack, listing slightly to the left under its weight, squinting at both of them with 8-year-old suspicion. "You're still talking," he said. "We're done," Claire said. "Coat." "I have my coat." "Put it on." Noah struggled into the coat with the studied martyrdom of a child who is perfectly capable of putting on a coat and finds the instruction deeply insulting. He looked at Adrian once more before following his mother toward the exit. "Is he coming to the book fair tomorrow?" Noah asked. "That's not decided yet," Claire said. "The books are pretty good so far. There's one about a kid who figures out his whole town is hiding a secret." He said this with perfect guilelessness, looking at Adrian as he said it. Adrian said nothing. Claire said nothing. Noah apparently took their silence as confirmation that adults were reliably uninteresting and pushed through the exit door into the cold. Claire followed him, then stopped with one hand on the doorframe. She didn't turn around. "The name," she said. "The person inside your organization. Who was it?" "His name was Hollis," Adrian said. "He was my father's estate manager. He died 2 years ago." "Convenient?" "Very." His voice was dry. "But not before talking. I have what he said on record." She was quiet for a moment. "How much of it do you believe?" "Enough to be standing in Silver Creek, Montana." He paused. "Enough to have come in person." She pushed the door open. Cold air rushed in. "Don't follow us home," she said. "I won't." She walked out. He watched the door close. He stood in the empty hallway for approximately 10 seconds, which was about as long as he could afford. Then he pressed the earpiece. "Carver, get the trace results to my phone, and find out if anyone in this town has been asking questions about a local school teacher in the last 14 months. Anyone at all." He waited. "And find out who Hollis talked to before he died." He walked back toward the gymnasium, and his phone buzzed before he reached the door. It was a photo. Claire's car in the school parking lot, taken from an angle above and to the north, through what looked like a telephoto lens. Time-stamped 40 minutes ago, before Adrian had arrived, before the cars were visible, before any of this had started. Below the photo, one line of text from the same prepaid number. "The boy has his father's eyes. Does the father know?" Adrian stared at the screen. The phone was steady in his hand. His hand was steady because he made it steady, because he was good at that, because he had been making himself steady in moments that wanted to break him apart for going on 20 years. He typed back, "Who are you?" The response came in 4 seconds. "Someone who has been waiting for you to find her. Now that you have..." The clock starts. Then a second message, immediate, before he could respond. "You have 48 hours to walk away from the empire entirely. Proof of transfer of authority, public and irreversible. Or we take the boy, and you spend the rest of your life wondering what he looks like now." Adrian read it twice. Then he put the phone in his pocket, walked to the gymnasium door, and pushed it open into the noise and warmth and cheerful wreckage of a school book fair, where a man named Carver was standing against a wall pretending to look at a picture book about dinosaurs. "Carver?" he said quietly. Carver put the book down. "Sir?" "Call Reeves. And call Mila in the New York office. Tell her we need a full exposure sweep on every board member and senior operator going back 36 months, he paused. And tell her it's not a drill. Carver's expression did not change. Timeline? Yesterday. He looked around the gymnasium. The books, the children, the volunteer parents, the ordinary warm machinery of a life he had no part in. And find out where Claire Bennett lives. Carver started to move. Carver. The man stopped. Quietly. And make sure nobody else finds out first. He stood in the doorway a moment longer, and the text message sat in his pocket like a coal, and somewhere across this small town, a woman who had spent 8 years building a life without him was driving home through the snow not knowing that the 48-hour clock had already begun to run. He turned and walked back into the cold. The snow was coming down harder now, the kind that stuck to everything and softened the edges of the world into something deceptively gentle. Adrian stood beside the lead Escalade and looked north toward the ridge where Claire's car had disappeared 10 minutes ago, and he let himself feel the full weight of it for exactly 30 seconds. The son he hadn't known, the years that couldn't be returned, the machine someone had been running against both of them long before tonight. 30 seconds. Then he put it away. Donovan. He climbed into the back seat. Get me everything we have on Hollis's financial records in the last 5 years of his life. Wire transfers, shell accounts, anything that moved. He pulled the door shut. Someone paid him to burn those letters. Someone patient enough to wait 14 months with eyes on a schoolteacher in rural Montana. That's not improvised. That's architecture. You think it goes back further than Hollis, Donovan said from the front. I think Hollis was a tool. I want to know whose hand was holding him. Adrian looked out the window at the snow-blurred streetlights of Silver Creek. And I want it tonight. The Escalade moved. The town slid past. The diner, the hardware store, the post office with its one working light, and Adrian Knox, who had dismantled 3 federal investigations and survived 2 attempts on his life, and built an empire on the systematic application of patience and controlled force, sat in the dark back seat and thought about a boy with his eyes reading a book about a town hiding a secret. The clock was running, and for the first time in a very long time, he was not the one who had started it. The call from Mila came at 11:47 that night. Adrian was in the motel room he'd taken under a name that didn't exist, sitting at the small desk with his jacket off and 3 laptops open and a cup of coffee going cold at his elbow. He'd been working through the financial architecture of Hollis's last 5 years. Wire transfers routed through a Cayman intermediary, 2 shell companies registered in Delaware, a pattern of quarterly deposits that had the particular rhythm of a retainer rather than a one-time payment. Someone had been paying Hollis for years, long before Claire left, long before the fake engagement, the intercepted letters, any of it. He picked up on the first ring. Talk to me. Mila Reyes had been his director of internal operations for 6 years, and she had the specific quality he valued most in the people closest to him. She did not soften information to protect his feelings. The sweep is done, she said. You're not going to like it. Tell me. The shell company that was paying Hollis, Meridian Consulting Group, registered 2009. I traced the beneficial ownership through 4 layers. A pause. Not hesitation. Mila didn't hesitate. It was the pause of someone organizing information to deliver it correctly. The final layer is a holding entity called Vantage Point Partners. It was dissolved in 2021, but the original registration documents are still in the Delaware archive. And the registered agent is a law firm in Philadelphia. The firm has 1 major client on record from that period. Another pause. The client is Garrett Knox. The room went very quiet. Adrian set down the coffee cup. Say that again. Garrett Knox, your father's younger brother. He's been living in Lisbon since 2018, which is part of why it took this long to surface. Mila's voice was carefully neutral, the voice of someone who understood the weight of what she was delivering and was not going to perform emotion about it. The payments to Hollis started in 2007, Adrian, 2 years before you met Claire. He sat with that for a moment. 2007. He'd been 26 years old in 2007, and Garrett had been the one who first brought him into the formal structure of the organization, the one who'd mentored him through the early years, The one who'd stood at the back of every significant meeting and offered counsel when the older men wouldn't listen to someone young. The one who had never, in 20 years, shown a single visible sign of wanting what Adrian had built, which was, Adrian now understood, the most expensive oversight of his life. The engagement, he said. The Vasquez family arrangement. I'm already there. He could hear her typing. The introduction between the Knox organization and the Vasquez family was brokered by an intermediary in 2015. I always assumed it was one of the senior operators, but the intermediary's fee, substantial, routed through a different shell, went to the same Vantage Point Partners account. Garrett arranged the engagement. Garrett arranged the threat that forced you to the table. The engagement itself was real on the Vasquez side. They thought it was a genuine alliance proposal. They didn't know you were coerced. A brief pause. When the engagement collapsed after Claire disappeared and you started dismantling the Vasquez connection, the Vasquez family lost significant revenue. They blamed you. They've been hostile to me for 3 years. Yes, which means Garrett burned that bridge on your behalf and now has the Vasquez family as potential allies against you because they both want you removed. She stopped typing. He built a coalition out of your wreckage, Adrian. This has been in motion for a very long time. He stood up from the desk. The room was small and the walls were close, and he moved to the window and looked out at the parking lot and the snow still coming down in the dark. And he breathed through the specific sensation of watching something he'd trusted for 20 years reveal itself to be a weapon pointed at his back. The text messages to Claire, he said. Garrett knows about her, has known where she was for at least 14 months, which is when the prepaid was purchased. Mila's voice dropped half a register. Adrian, he knows about the boy. How? I don't know yet, but the fact that the first message referenced Noah specifically, before you'd confirmed anything publicly, that's not a guess. That's sourced information. He pressed his palm flat against the cold window glass. Outside, one of the Escalades sat in the far corner of the lot, Donovan inside, running his own quiet perimeter. Everything looked still. Everything had looked still for years, and under it, Garrett Knox had been building the architecture of this moment. Patient, invisible, funded, connected, waiting for the moment Adrian found something he couldn't afford to lose. He needs me to surrender authority publicly, Adrian said, an irreversible public transfer, which removes you permanently. No legal comeback, no internal claim. Once you sign over in a documented and witnessed format, anyone who might have stayed loyal to you has no structure to rally to. And if I don't? Mila didn't answer that because they both knew what the alternative was. Where's Garrett now? He asked. His last confirmed location was Lisbon, 4 days ago. Private flight, manifest not filed properly. We're trying to reconstruct the destination. A keyboard sound. He might be closer than Lisbon. Find him. Adrian's voice had gone flat in the way it went flat when the decision space had narrowed to one point. And Mila, nobody else in the office gets this information. Not the board members, not operations, not anyone with a Knox Foundation connection. Because we don't know how deep his network goes inside our structure. Because we don't know how deep it goes. He paused. The 48-hour clock. He sent the text at approximately 2:45 this afternoon, which puts the deadline at 2:45 day after tomorrow. I have less than that. He'll move early if he thinks I'm building a counter. Aggressive timelines are his hedge against preparation. He knew this because Garrett had taught him this, had sat across from him at a kitchen table 20 years ago and explained the geometry of pressure campaigns with the patience of a man sharing genuine wisdom. I need to be on the ground here and invisible before he realizes I'm not running. I'll keep the New York office dark on your location. Good. He turned from the window. One more thing. The woman and the boy. Yes. A short pause. I can have 2 people in Silver Creek by 6 a.m. Quiet, local-looking, nothing that raises a flag. Passive watch only unless something moves. Do it. He picked up his jacket from the chair. And Mila, the people you send, people you chose yourself. Nobody recommended by the board. She understood what he meant. Already planned that way. He ended the call and stood in the center of the room for a long moment with his jacket in his hands and the specific cold clarity of someone who has just had the map of their world redrawn and is deciding how to move through the new geography. Then he put the jacket on and went to find Claire. She didn't answer the door for 2 full minutes after he knocked. He knew she was awake. There was light under the door, and he could hear the particular silence of someone standing very still on the other side, deciding whether to engage. He waited. He didn't knock again. The door opened. She was in jeans and a flannel shirt with her hair loose and her eyes carrying the red-edged look of someone who had been crying recently and was not going to mention it. She looked at him for 1 second and then passed him at the dark street, checking automatically the way a person checks when they've been living alert for years. "Noah's asleep," she said. "I know, I'm not here about Noah." "Then what? Can I come in?" She held the door open and stepped back, which was all the answer she gave. The house was small and warm and precisely organized in the way that the homes of people who've rebuilt their lives from nothing tend to be. Everything in its place, everything functional, nothing wasted. There were children's drawings on the refrigerator and a stack of graded papers on the kitchen table and a half-drunk cup of tea on the counter going the same direction as his coffee had earlier. She'd been sitting at that table, he thought, sitting and thinking in the dark. She crossed her arms and waited. He told her about Garrett. He told her everything. The shell companies, the retainer payments dating to 2007, the engineered engagement, the intercepted correspondence, the Vasquez alliance, the 14 months of surveillance on her address. He told it straight. No editorializing, the same way he'd received it from Mila, as a sequence of facts that assembled into a shape neither of them had been able to see until now. She listened without moving. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet enough to hear the refrigerator hum. "Your uncle," she said. "My father's brother." "Yes." "He's been doing this since 2007. "Since before I met you?" "Yes." I think you were already a liability in his plan before you were anything to me. He needed me without attachments, without anything that could be used as leverage against me or used by me as a reason to walk away from the empire before he was ready to take it." She looked at him. "He didn't expect you to fall for me." "I don't think he expected it to matter as much as it did." He paused. "When it did, when he understood what you were to me, he adapted the plan. The fake engagement became a way to remove you without removing you. You'd leave on your own, believing I'd chosen someone else. Cleaner than the alternative." "The alternative being?" He didn't answer. She closed her eyes briefly. "And now he wants you out," she said. "Publicly, irreversibly. Within 48 hours, the threat is Noah." The word landed between them with its full weight. She didn't flinch. He'd noticed she rarely flinched at the impact of things, only at the aftermath. But something in her face changed, something deep and structural, the specific hardening of a person who has identified the precise target of what they're afraid of and is now converting that fear into fuel. "He won't touch him," she said. It wasn't reassurance. It was a statement of intent. "That's my intention as well." "Your intention," her voice had an edge now. "Adrian, your intention is what got us into this. Your world is what built all of this. That man, your uncle, he only has leverage over me because of you, because of what I was to you, because of Noah." Her voice stayed level, but there was something volcanic underneath it, something that had been pressurized for a very long time. "I need you to understand that. You being here, you finding me, didn't just bring danger. It confirmed the target. If I'd never come, Garrett would have used you anyway." He kept his voice even. "The prepaid number is 14 months old, Claire. He's been watching you. He didn't need me to find you. He already had you. He needed me to find you so he'd have a deadline to work with." She went still. "The book donation," he said. "The anonymous request routed through a fake address. I told you someone arranged for me to come here specifically. That was Garrett. He set the meeting. He brought us to the same room because he needed you visible to me so he could put Noah in the threat. He used you to confirm Noah was yours." "Yes." She turned away from him and put both hands on the counter and looked at the kitchen window, which showed nothing but her own reflection and the dark behind it. Her shoulders were taut, her breathing careful. He watched her work through it, the specific anguish of discovering that the thing you feared most wasn't random danger, but calculated, targeted, patient malice that had been oriented toward you for over a year without your knowledge. "What do you need from me?" she said finally. Not defeat. Pragmatism. He'd always loved that about her, the speed with which she moved from emotion to action. "I need you to let Mila's people stay close." "How close?" "Rotating watch on the house, nothing visible from the street." She turned. "And Noah's school?" "Two people already positioned on the perimeter. They were there at 6 a.m. this morning." Her jaw tightened. "You did that before telling me." "Yes." "You should have told me first." "If I told you first, you would have said no." "So you made the decision for me." The flatness in her voice was a specific kind of flat, not cold, but worn. The flatness of someone who has been managing their own survival for so long that the idea of someone else making protective decisions on their behalf registers as a threat even when it isn't. "I made the decision that kept your son safer for 12 more hours while I gathered information to bring to you," he said. "I'm not going to apologize for that." She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. The kitchen hummed around them. "There's something else," he said. "Of course there is." He pulled out his phone and brought up the document Mila had sent 40 minutes ago. The reconstruction of Hollis's financial records, the shell company layers, the Vantage Point registration. He set the phone on the counter where she could see it without taking it. "Hollis started receiving payments in 2007, 2 years before you and I met. But there's a secondary payment stream that starts later, 2014. Different account, different shell, but traceable to the same beneficial owner." She looked at the screen. "What was he being paid for in 2014? "That's what I need to understand." He paused. "The 2014 payments coincide with something specific. In early 2014, you filed for a teaching certificate in Idaho. You were living under a different name at that point." Her head came up slowly. "You were in Idaho for 4 months in 2014, he said, and watched her face. "Then you moved again. Ended up in Montana by the end of the year." "How do you know that?" she said carefully. "Because someone was tracking you in 2014 and they were paying Hollis for the information. And when you moved again that fall, fast, no forwarding address, the payments to Hollis dropped to a maintenance level and a new operative appeared in the financial record." He picked up the phone. "Someone was running a surveillance contract on you that predated me finding you by years, Claire. Garrett has known roughly where you were since 2014. She had gone very still. "He let me stay here," she said. The words came out slowly, the way words come out when the mind is assembling something terrible in real time. "He knew where I was. He didn't take Noah. He didn't threaten me. He just watched. He was waiting. For what? For me." His voice was quiet. "He needed me to find you myself. If he'd just told me you were here, if he'd handed me the location, I might have found a way to extract you both quietly without the public exposure he needed. He needed me to walk into that gymnasium, to see Noah, to have that reaction in front of witnesses." He paused. "Carver saw it. The parent volunteers saw something, and Garrett has someone in this town, which means Garrett has documentation of the moment I understood Noah was my son." "Why does he need that?" "Because now he can threaten to expose it publicly, the crime boss with a secret child. The leverage runs both directions. He can threaten Noah's safety to make me surrender the empire, and he can threaten to expose Noah's existence to the press and to every enemy I have left, making the boy a target permanently, whether or not I surrender." He set the phone down. It's a closed trap. Whichever direction I move, he has a mechanism." Claire was quiet for a long time. Outside, the snow had stopped at some point without either of them noticing, and the street was white and still and deeply silent, the way mountain towns go silent after 2 in the morning. "There's a way out," she said. Not a question. "There might be. It requires something I haven't done before." "What?" "Letting go of the thing he's trying to take." He met her eyes. "If I surrender the empire on my own terms, before his deadline, Using a legal framework that simultaneously exposes the criminal architecture to federal oversight, I remove his leverage. He can't threaten to take what I've already given away. And if the federal exposure implicates Garrett's network in the same filing, he goes down with it. If the evidence is solid enough and I move fast enough, she looked at him. You'd lose everything. I'd lose the empire. He was careful about the distinction. That's not everything. She looked away. He let her. The clock on the microwave read 2:17 a.m. Then Noah's voice came from the hallway. Mom? Both of them turned. Noah was standing in the hallway door in pajamas with a soccer ball on them, hair sideways from sleep, blinking in the kitchen light. He looked at his mother, then at Adrian, without particular alarm, just the evaluating look of a child processing an unexpected piece of data. Why is the book guy here? He said. We were talking, Claire said. Go back to bed. It's the middle of the night. Yes, it is. Noah looked at Adrian again, longer this time. There was something in the look that Adrian had to keep himself from reacting to, the directness of it, the unself-conscious assessment, the complete absence of the performed effect that adults learned over time to deploy as armor. Just a kid looking at a stranger in his kitchen at 2 a.m. and trying to figure out what the situation was. Are you staying here? Noah asked. No, Claire said. Are you guys... Noah visibly tried to find the phrasing. Friends? Complicated, Adrian said before Claire could answer. Noah appeared to find this adequate. He nodded once, the nod of a person who has received a categorically honest answer and respects it. Then he said, There's a car parked on our street with its lights off, and pointed vaguely at the front of the house. I saw it from my window. It's been there a while. Adrian was moving before Noah finished the sentence. He crossed the kitchen, hit the light switch, and moved to the front window in the dark, angling his body to the side of the frame, looking out. The car was there. Black, late model, parked 40 feet up the street. No lights, engine probably running. There was a faint exhaust plume visible in the cold air. Not one of his cars. His people were behind the house and in the motel lot. He pressed the earpiece. Donovan. Black sedan, north end of Maple Street. Is that yours? The answer came back in 3 seconds. Negative. Adrian's hand found his phone. He typed a single word to Mila. Now. Then he turned to Claire, who was already there, reading his face, reading the room, her hand on Noah's shoulder pulling the boy back from the hallway entrance without making it look like what it was. Back door, she said to Noah. Quiet, level, no panic in it. Put your boots on. Mom, what? Boots, now. She looked at Adrian. How long do we have? I don't know. He was already moving to the back of the house, checking the rear window. The alley behind was clear for now. Mila's people are 7 minutes out. 7 minutes is... The front window exploded inward. Not gunfire. A projectile. Something small and canister-shaped that hit the hardwood floor and rolled and began immediately issuing a dense gray chemical smoke that smelled of copper and burned the back of the throat on contact. Adrian had Claire's arm before she could move toward Noah. Don't breathe it in. Stay low. Noah! She pulled hard against his grip. He went to the back. Adrian kept his voice at the exact pitch that carried without sounding like panic. He went for his boots. He's at the back door. We go to him right now. Move. They moved through the smoke, low, Claire pulling free of his grip and moving on her own because she knew this house and he didn't. He followed her heat and the sound of her bare feet on the floor, keeping one hand on the wall. His eyes were streaming. The smoke was dense and fast, and whoever had thrown it knew what they were doing. The back door was open. Noah was gone. Claire made a sound he would hear for the rest of his life, short, sharp. The sound of a person whose worst fear has just stepped out of the abstract and into the physical world. She pushed through the open door into the cold alley, and Adrian came out behind her, and the alley was empty in both directions, and the snow held footprints leading east, small ones, a child's boot, and then larger ones alongside them. And then the track stopped at the alley entrance, where the pavement had been scraped clean by a passing vehicle, and there was nothing left to follow. Claire stood at the alley entrance in her bare feet in the snow, and she did not scream. He would remember that later, that she did not scream, that she went absolutely silent instead, the silence of someone whose system has exceeded its capacity for sound. She stood there with her arms at her sides and her chest heaving and her feet going white in the snow, and she stared at the empty street where her son had been. Adrian was already on the phone. Donovan, they took the boy. East Alley off Maple, vehicle unknown, headed. He looked at the street, read the tire compression in the snow at the curb. Wide base, heavy vehicle. SUV or van, recent. Get eyes on every road out of town now. Call the Billings contact. I want air assets if there are any. He ended the call and turned to Claire. She turned to him at the same moment, and her face had completed its transformation. The grief was still there, underneath, but on top of it was something harder and colder and far more dangerous than grief. The face of a woman who had built 8 years of quiet, ordinary life as a wall between her son and the world she'd escaped, and had just watched that wall come down, and was now done with walls entirely. "You said there was a way out," she said. Her voice was stripped of everything except the core of it. A legal framework, federal exposure, evidence. Yes. How fast can you build it? 48 hours, maybe less if... Build it. She stepped back toward the house, her feet leaving blood-edged prints in the snow where the cold had cracked the skin. But we're not waiting 48 hours to find my son. No, he said. We are not. She stopped at the door and looked at him over her shoulder, and what he saw in her face in that moment was the thing he'd carried with him for 8 years without being able to name it correctly. Not just love, not just loss, but the specific recognition of someone whose core was made of the same material as his own. Different lives, different choices, different costs. Same foundation. Then we do this together, she said. All of it. No more decisions without me. Agreed. She went inside. He followed. And the clock, which had been running since 2:45 the previous afternoon, continued to run. Indifferent, mechanical, counting down toward a deadline that neither of them intended to honor on anyone's terms but their own. They had 40 minutes before Garrett's people would expect a response. Adrian knew this because Garrett had taught him the window, the gap between an aggressive move and the follow-up contact, the space designed to let pressure build without giving the target time to fully organize. He'd used it himself a dozen times. He knew exactly how long it lasted and what it was designed to produce. Panic, isolation, a decision made from the gut instead of the head. He was not going to give Garrett the decision he was designed for. The kitchen table had become a command center in under 10 minutes. 2 laptops, Adrian's phone running a live feed from Mila's office in New York, a detailed topographic map of the Silver Creek Valley that Carver had pulled from the county planning database and printed at the motel's front desk. Claire sat across from Adrian with wet hair and boots on, and a kitchen knife she'd taken from the block without comment and set on the table beside her left hand. She hadn't touched it since. She didn't need to. It was a statement. Donovan's voice came through the laptop speaker. Vehicle was a dark gray cargo van, partial plate match to a rental out of Missoula. The rental was made 6 days ago under a name that traces to a defunct LLC in Nevada. We've got a probable route east on Route 2 toward the Rattlesnake Pass junction. Rattlesnake Pass goes to the old Kessler mining complex, Claire said. She said it immediately, without hesitation, the automatic knowledge of someone who'd spent 7 years in a place and learned its geography the way you learn your own house. The main shaft entrance is about 11 miles in on a Forest Service road. It's been decommissioned for 30 years. There's no cell signal past the first ridge. Adrian looked at her. You know the complex. I took Noah there last spring. There's a historical marker. We hiked. Her jaw tightened. It's isolated. Multiple structures. Old processing buildings, rail yards, tunnels. If you wanted to hold someone where nobody would hear, it fits, Donovan said through the speaker. Garrett's people would have scouted locations in advance. Something that remote, that's structurally complex, easy to control access, hard to approach without being seen. How many people does Garrett have on the ground here? Adrian said. We're estimating 6 to 8 based on the vehicle logistics and the surveillance pattern. Garrett himself saw it, still unconfirmed whether he's physically present. He's present. Adrian said it with the certainty of someone who understood the man's psychology from the inside. He wouldn't run an operation this personal by remote. He wants to see it close. Claire looked at the map. Her finger traced the Forest Service road without touching the paper, hovering an inch above it. There's a secondary access route. A logging trail comes in from the north side of the ridge. It's not on most maps. The county planning database might have it, but it's marked as inactive. She looked up at Donovan's laptop camera. Can you check the 1987 Forestry Survey records? It would be filed under Custer National Forest, Sector 9. A pause, typing. Found it. Logging trail, north approach, last maintained 1991. It adds about 4 miles to the approach, but it comes out above the main complex on the ridge. High ground, Carver said from behind Adrian. The man had been standing against the wall since they came inside, and he'd been quiet in the way he was always quiet. Not absent, but processing, running his own internal calculations. We come in from above. We can see the whole yard before they see us. We're not a strike team, Adrian said. We're 3 people, and whatever Mila can get airborne, which at this hour in rural Montana is limited. He looked at the map. We need them to move Noah before they realize we're coming. If he's inside the mine shaft, extraction gets significantly harder. So we make them move him, Claire said. Everyone looked at her. She met Adrian's eyes across the table. You said Garrett needs you to surrender publicly. That's his mechanism. If he thinks you're about to do it, if he gets communication that you're complying, that you're preparing the transfer documents, he'll want Noah visible and controllable for the handoff. He'll bring him out of whatever structure he's in and into the open where the exchange can be documented. Adrian was quiet for 3 seconds. You want me to tell him I'm surrendering? I want you to make him believe it long enough for us to get into position. She held his gaze. Can you do that? Can you write something convincing enough that he'll buy it? I can write something convincing, Adrian said. The question is whether he believes it or uses it as confirmation that I'm stalling. He'll believe it if it comes with something real, Mila's voice said through the laptop. Something he can verify. Adrian, the Hargrove Street account, the discretionary fund. If you initiate a partial transfer from that account, the movement will show up in the financial monitoring systems Garrett has access to. It'll look like you're liquidating preparatory to a full transfer. That account has $11 million in it. Yes. A silence. Initiate it, Adrian said. Cap the transfer at $3 million, routed to the Meridian account. Let him see his own shell receiving money. He'll read it as a peace gesture, confirmation that I'm complying on his terms. Mila was already moving. Initiating. It'll show on his monitoring in approximately 12 minutes. Claire was watching him. He met her eyes and understood what she was looking at. A man moving money the way other men move chess pieces, the specific fluency of someone for whom these numbers had always been instruments rather than ends. He had no idea what she made of it. He filed that question for a future that required them to still be standing. 12 minutes, he said. We move in 10. They went out through the back. The cold hit like a physical force. Not the wet cold of the earlier snowfall, but a deeper, drier bite that got into the lungs and tightened them. Claire moved fast, no hesitation, following the alley east to where Donovan had repositioned the lead Escalade 2 blocks over. Carver was on her right, Adrian on her left, and she had the strange compressed sensation of moving in formation with people trained for exactly this kind of movement, while she herself was a third-grade reading teacher who last week had been mediating a dispute over a pencil case. She pushed that thought down hard and kept moving. They loaded into the Escalade in under 20 seconds. Donovan was already driving before the last door closed. Route, Adrian said. Forest Service Road is the fastest approach, Donovan said. Logging trail adds time, but gives us the ridge advantage. Your call. Split it, Carver said. 2 go up the logging trail, come in from above. 1 vehicle takes the main road, hangs back far enough to not trigger their perimeter, pushes forward when the ridge team signals they're in position. You and me on the ridge, Adrian said to Carver. He looked at Claire. You stay with Donovan on the main. No. The word came out flat and absolute. He's my son. Claire, the ridge approach is a 4-mile hike in the dark at below zero. I know this mountain. She turned to look at him fully. and her face in the pale light from the dashboard was the face he'd seen in the kitchen doorway an hour ago. Past fear, past deliberation, arrived at something simpler and more elemental. I've hiked it. I know where the trail breaks down and where the ice is and where the footing goes bad. You don't. She paused. And I'm not sitting in a car 2 miles away while someone else goes to get my son. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he turned front. Carver takes the main road vehicle. Claire comes with me on the ridge. Carver nodded once. Donovan said nothing. The Escalade moved through Silver Creek's empty streets and out onto Route 2 heading east, and the town fell away behind them, and the mountains rose up dark and enormous against the lesser dark of the sky. Adrian's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Garrett's current burner, different from the one used earlier. 2 words. Wise choice. He'd seen the transfer initiation. He was watching in real time. Adrian typed back, I need proof of life before I finalize anything. The response took 90 seconds, long enough that Adrian felt the weight in his molars. Then a photograph came through. Noah, sitting on a concrete floor against a metal wall, arms around his knees, wearing his coat. His face was turned slightly toward the camera with an expression that Adrian needed a full second to decode, and when he decoded it, he felt something shift in his chest that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite grief, but was somewhere between them. The expression on Noah's face was not terror. It was the concentrated, furious assessment of a child who is very angry about his situation and is actively thinking about what to do about it. He showed it to Claire without a word. She looked at it for exactly 2 seconds. Her hand found the door handle and gripped it, not to open it, just to hold something. He's okay, she said quietly. Statement, not question. She was telling herself, not asking him. He's okay, Adrian confirmed. He typed to Garrett, proof of location. I'm not finalizing anything without confirmation of where the exchange happens. Another wait. Then a pin dropped on a mapping app. The Kessler Mining Complex. Main yard. Claire was already looking at the topo map on Adrian's phone, triangulating. The main yard is here, she said, pointing. Open ground, old rail infrastructure, processing shed on the north end. If they bring him into the yard for the exchange, we'll see it from the ridge. She traced the path. But the ridge overlook is here, about 300 meters above. There's a rock formation, a ledge. I took pictures from it when Noah and I hiked up. Cover an elevation, Carver said from the front, and a clear line down to the entire yard. Donovan slowed at a forestry junction. Here's where we split. They got out in the dark. The logging trail was barely visible, a gap in the tree line, old wheel ruts frozen solid under 6 inches of snow. Adrian had a flashlight and Carver handed him a second one before climbing back into the Escalade. No words exchanged. Carver understood timelines in silence. The Escalade's lights disappeared around the bend, and Adrian and Claire were alone on the mountain. They moved. Claire set the pace and he matched it, faster than he'd expected from her, sure-footed on the iced ruts, reading the trail with the unconscious confidence of someone who had walked this kind of ground before. He stayed close, watching her footing, watching the tree line on both sides. The cold was a sustained physical pressure. His hands were adequate in gloves, but his face was not, and he stopped noticing it after the first 20 minutes. She didn't speak unless she needed to. Ice here, she'd say, or switchback coming, and he'd respond with a sound or a nod. It was the most concentrated silence he'd ever shared with another person, and it had a quality he couldn't quite name. Not comfortable, not uncomfortable, but load-bearing somehow. The silence of 2 people who have moved past the need to fill space with words and are operating on something more direct. They were 40 minutes up the trail when his phone vibrated. No signal for a call. They'd lost that 20 minutes ago. But the text had queued and delivered in a brief flicker of coverage on the ridge approach. From Mila. Garrett Knox confirmed on site at Kessler Complex. Private vehicle arrived approximately 2 hours ago. Also, Adrian. The Vasquez family. 2 of their vehicles tracked to Silver Creek this evening, separate from Garrett's operation. They may be running a parallel play. He read it twice. Then he showed it to Claire. She read it. The Vasquez family. Garrett's allied with them. I told you, But if they're running separate from his operation, they might not be here to help him, she said slowly. They might be here for their own reasons. They blame me for the collapsed engagement. They lost revenue. He was working through it as he said it, the pieces assembling with the uncomfortable speed of a picture you didn't want to see clearly. If Garrett delivers me publicly stripped of the empire, the Vasquez family gets, what? A weakened target. Someone they can go after without the full organization behind me. Unless, Claire was quiet for a moment. Her breath came in controlled pulls, visible in the cold. Unless the Vasquez family isn't allied with Garrett at all. Unless someone told them Garrett was here. Someone who wanted both of them in the same location. He stopped walking. She stopped 2 steps later and turned. Mila, he said. Who else knew Garrett's location tonight? Mila found it. Mila reported it to me. He could hear his own voice doing the thing it did when the math was coming out wrong, going quieter, going more careful. And Mila is the one who suggested initiating the Hargrove transfer, which told Garrett you were complying, which brought him out into the open. He stood on the frozen trail in the dark and felt the architecture rearrange itself again, the second time in 6 hours. Mila has been with me for 6 years. How did Garrett recruit Hollis? He didn't answer. How long was Hollis with your family before Garrett turned him? 15 years, he said. Quiet, flat. Claire looked at him. The flashlight beam caught her face from below, and in the harsh upward light, she looked like someone who had run out of patience for the world's capacity to be worse than expected. You need to assume the transfer she initiated is being monitored by more than Garrett. If Mila is Garrett's inside person, then she's been feeding him your moves all night. Claire's voice was stripped down to its frame. Everything you told her, the location sweep, Carver's route, the ridge approach. He was already pulling up the Signal Booster app on his phone, the one that could sometimes punch a text through where a call wouldn't land. He typed to Carver in 3 words. Change your route. He waited. The signal bar flickered. The message showed delivered. Then Carver's response came back in under a minute, and it was 4 words that landed like a stone dropped from a height into still water. Already surrounded. Don't come. Adrian stared at the screen. Claire read it over his arm. Neither of them spoke for 2 full seconds. Then from somewhere below and to the east, carried up the mountain by the cold and the silence, came the sound of a single gunshot, flat and clean and final, and then nothing but the wind moving through the frozen pines. Claire's hand found his arm, not for comfort, for anchor. Her fingers closed on his jacket sleeve and held, and he could feel the pressure of it through the layers, and he stood on the frozen trail and made himself think rather than react, because reacting to a gunshot in the dark on a mountain where he didn't know the positions was how people died. He typed to Carver. Status? Nothing. The delivered indicator sat there without a response indicator following it. He typed to Donovan. Report. 8 seconds. Then, Carver's vehicle stopped. I can see lights at the main road junction. Multiple vehicles. I'm holding position. Adrian typed back, hold, do not engage, do not move toward the complex. He put the phone in his pocket and looked at Claire. She was already looking at him, and her face had the specific quality of someone who has done the calculation and arrived at the answer and is waiting to see if the other person gets there too. Carver might be down, he said. He said it straight because she deserved straight. Her jaw worked once. Then we're what's left. Yes. And they know we're on the ridge. If Mila told them the plan, yes. She looked up the trail, then back at him. The flashlight threw sharp shadows across her face. They'll expect us to retreat. Yes. So we don't retreat. He looked at her for one moment, this woman who had spent 8 years building a quiet life in the mountains and was now standing on a frozen trail in the dark talking about not retreating. And he felt something move through him that was not the time for and would have to wait for a future he wasn't certain of yet. There's a secondary entrance to the main yard, she said, on the east side of the processing shed. When Noah and I were there, it was boarded, but the boards were rotted through. I remember thinking someone could just walk in. She met his eyes. Someone who knew it was there. How close does the trail bring us to that entrance? 80 meters, maybe less. He pulled the phone out one more time and typed a single message, not to Carver, not to Donovan, but to a federal contact number he had memorized 4 years ago and never used. The number a man had pressed into his hand at the end of a very long meeting and said, "Keep this for the day you decide you've had enough." He typed the GPS coordinates of the Kessler complex, the name Garrett Knox, and 3 words, "Come now." Evidence attached. Then he attached the financial records Mila had sent him earlier. All of it, the shell companies, the retainer payments, the Vasquez connection, the whole architecture of 20 years of manipulation. And he sent it before he could think about what it meant for everything he'd built. It meant the end of it, all of it. He put the phone away. 80 meters, he said. Claire turned up the trail. "Stay close," she said, "and stay quiet." They moved together into the dark, toward the place where Noah was waiting, and behind them the empire that Adrian Knox had spent his adult life constructing dissolved into a federal evidence file and began, quietly and irrevocably, to cease to exist. The processing shed appeared through the tree line as a black shape against the lesser black of the sky, and Claire moved toward it without slowing, her breath controlled, her feet certain on the frozen ground. Adrian stayed a half step behind her and to the right, and when she reached the east wall and found the rotted boards exactly where she'd remembered them, she pulled the first one free with her bare hands, splinters catching her palm, and didn't make a sound. She looked back at him once. He nodded. She went through first. He followed. And somewhere inside, in the dark and the cold, Noah was waiting for his mother to come through the wall. The inside of the processing shed smelled of rust and frozen earth and something older underneath. Machine oil soaked into concrete over decades, the ghost of industrial labor long since gone quiet. Claire moved through the dark with one hand on the wall and Adrian 2 steps behind her, and neither of them used the flashlight because light in a dark building was a signal, and they were done announcing themselves. The shed was larger than it looked from outside. Claire had been through it once, in daylight, with Noah pointing at old equipment and asking questions she'd had to look up later. She remembered the layout the way you remember a place you walked through while your attention was elsewhere, imperfectly, in fragments, the general shape without the specific details. Main floor, conveyor infrastructure gone to rust, a raised operator platform on the north end, stairs on the east side going down to a lower processing level. Voices from below. She stopped. Adrian stopped behind her. They stood in the dark and listened. 2 men, from the sound of it. Low, unhurried. The voices of people who believed they were in a controlled situation. She couldn't make out words. She could make out tone, and the tone was not urgent, which meant Noah was still where they'd left him, and nothing had changed yet. Adrian's mouth came to within an inch of her ear. Stairs. She nodded and moved toward them, testing each foot placement before committing her weight, reading the floor for debris and soft spots the way she'd learned to read things over years of moving carefully through a life that required it. The stairs were metal and would ring like a bell under a heavy step. She went sideways, weight on the outer edge of each tread where the metal was supported by the frame, and Adrian mirrored her exactly, and they went down 12 steps into the lower level in near silence. The lower level was lit, not brightly, a portable work light, the battery-powered kind that construction crews used, sitting on the floor throwing a harsh white circle across maybe 30 feet of space. Beyond the circle, darkness. Inside it, 2 men, a folding chair, and Noah. Noah was in the chair. His hands were zip-tied in front of him, which was the detail that hit Claire somewhere below the stomach and required 3 full seconds of internal work before she could keep thinking clearly. His coat was still on. He was looking at the floor with the concentrated expression she recognized as his deliberate not showing anything face, the expression he wore when he was in trouble at school and refusing to give the other person the satisfaction of seeing him rattled. 8 years old, and already that kind of stubborn. She didn't know whether to feel proud or wrecked. She felt both. The 2 men were positioned badly, both on the same side of the light, which meant they destroyed their own night vision and couldn't see anything past the edge of the circle. Amateur positioning. Garrett had sent capable people for the surveillance work and apparently less capable ones for the holding detail, which told Adrian something about how Garrett valued this part of the operation. Logistics, not combat. He hadn't expected anyone to come through the wall. Adrian leaned to Claire's ear again. The one on the left. I take him. The other one moves toward Noah. You move faster. She turned her head a fraction. I'm faster than you think. I know. A pause. On 3. She found her footing in the dark. The concrete was uneven, and there was a piece of fallen conduit 2 feet to her left that she needed to not touch. She identified the path, 11 feet of floor to the light's edge, another 6 to where Noah sat. She measured it in her body, the way you measure a distance you're about to run before you run it. Adrian's hand touched her back once. That was 3. She moved. She crossed the dark floor and hit the light's edge, before the man on the right finished turning his head. And then she was past the light and her hand was on the back of Noah's chair, and she put her body between her son and the man in the same motion, and behind her she heard the impact of Adrian taking the first man down. Controlled, fast, the sound of someone who'd done this before and wasn't wasting energy on anything unnecessary. The second man was bigger than she'd registered from the dark. He got his hands up and took a step toward her, and she shoved the chair with Noah in it hard to the left, out of the direct line, and planted her feet. Don't, she said. The word came out with a steadiness that surprised even her. He hesitated. 1 second, maybe less. And that was when Adrian came over her right shoulder and the man went down hard, his head connecting with the concrete floor at an angle that knocked him immediately and completely out. Silence. The work light hummed. Claire turned to Noah. Her hands were shaking. She noticed it now, the post-movement tremor of a body that had been holding itself very tight for a very long time. And she got down on her knees in front of the chair and looked at his face. His eyes were dry. His jaw was set. He looked at her with an expression that was trying very hard to be fine and was about 60% of the way there. Hi, he said. Hi. Her voice came out wrecked in a way she couldn't control. She didn't try to control it. You okay? My hands hurt. I know. She looked at the zip ties. Adrian produced a folding knife from his jacket pocket and cut them in 2 seconds, and Noah brought his hands to his chest and rubbed his wrists without making a sound about it, which made something in Claire's throat close. That guy, Noah said, looking at the man on the floor. Don't worry about him, Adrian said. Noah looked at Adrian, then back at Claire, then at the man on the floor again. I heard you coming down the stairs, he said. I didn't look up so they wouldn't look at where you were coming from. Claire stared at him. The book, he said, as if this explained something. The one about the town with the secret. The kid does that, keeps the bad guys looking the wrong way. He paused. It worked. Adrian made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in the same neighborhood. Claire pulled Noah off the chair and into her arms, and held him with the specific fierceness of a person who has rehearsed this moment in their worst nightmares for the last 4 hours, and is now living the version where it goes right, and she pressed her face against the top of his head and breathed. He let her hold him for approximately 6 seconds, which for Noah was a long time, and then said, Mom. Too tight. She loosened her grip, but she didn't let go. We need to move, Adrian said quietly. Garrett is somewhere in this complex and we don't know where. As if the name had summoned him, a voice came from the darkness beyond the work light. Calm. Unhurried. The voice of a man who had walked into a room he believed he owned. I was wondering which entrance you'd use. Garrett Knox stepped into the light from the north end of the room, and he looked exactly the way Adrian had described him to Claire in the abstract. Late 60s, silver-haired, the build of a man who had once been physically powerful and had shifted that energy into stillness. He was wearing a heavy coat, and he had his hands in his pockets, which was either confidence or theater, and with Garrett, Adrian had always suspected it was both simultaneously. He looked at Adrian with the specific expression of someone encountering a situation they had planned for, and at Claire with polite acknowledgement, and at Noah with something that might have been the distant recognition of a man identifying a variable he'd calculated correctly. You sent the transfer, Garrett said to Adrian. 3 million, Hargrove to Meridian. I appreciated the gesture. I needed you to think I was complying. I know, Garrett smiled, not warmly, the smile of a chess player acknowledging a reasonable move. I also know you sent a federal contact the financial package 40 minutes ago. Mila told me. I assumed she would. And you came anyway. Garrett looked at him steadily. That's either very brave or very stupid, Adrian. I've never been able to decide which one you lean toward. How long has Mila been yours? Adrian said. 4 years. She approached me, actually, not the other way around. A slight pause. She believed you were becoming what your father was. She wasn't wrong. She could have just quit. People like Mila don't just quit things. You know that. You hired her for exactly that quality. Garrett took one hand out of his pocket, empty, which was deliberate, another piece of theater. I want you to understand something, Adrian. This was never about the money. The Empire's and I don't want it. I'm 67 years old. I have no interest in running anything. Then what? I want it gone. He said it simply, and for the first time since he'd stepped into the light, something in his voice was not performance. Your father built something that consumed everything around it, including your father, including your mother, which you were too young to understand properly, including your uncle, by the way. I spent 30 years inside that machine before I understood that the only way out was to dismantle it from the inside. He paused. I needed someone with enough authority to expose the entire structure in a single filing. That had to be you. Willingly. Which meant I needed leverage. The room was very quiet. You didn't need to take my son, Claire said. Her voice was the flattest Adrian had ever heard it. She was still holding Noah, one arm around his shoulders, and she was looking at Garrett with an expression that was not anger exactly. It was the expression of someone who has processed an injustice completely and is now simply stating a verdict. Garrett looked at her. No, he said. I didn't. That decision was made by people acting outside my instructions. His jaw tightened fractionally. The surveillance, yes. The text messages, yes. The boy, he stopped. That was not sanctioned. But you knew, Adrian said. A silence. I knew, Garrett said. I allowed it to proceed because it accelerated your decision. He said it without flinching, which was the most honest thing about him. He did not dress up his calculations as anything other than what they were. I won't ask you to forgive that. Good, Claire said. Because that's not a conversation we're having. From outside, distant but closing, came the sound of vehicles. Multiple engines, the heavy drone of something larger than an SUV. And then, faintly, the particular acoustic signature of a helicopter, still far off but moving toward them with purpose. The federal contact had received the package. Garrett heard it too. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at Adrian, and his expression had completed its shift into something that was not quite resignation, but was in the same territory. The expression of a man who has moved a very large object a very long distance and has finally set it down. The filing, he said. Did you include the Vasquez connection? Everything, Adrian said. 36 months of board records, shell architecture, your network, Mila's communication logs. Everything Hollis documented before he died. All of it. Good. Garrett said it like he meant it. Then it's done. You'll be included in what they find. I know. He said it without drama. I've known that since 2019 when I started building the case against myself along with everything else. He reached into his coat pocket, slowly, visibly, making clear what it wasn't, and produced a flash drive. He set it on the concrete floor and slid it across with his foot. That's the remainder. Domestic account structures, 3 names Mila didn't have access to, and the full record of the Hollis payments, including the original authorization document signed by my hand. He looked at Adrian. Use it. Adrian looked at the drive on the floor between them. He looked at Garrett. 20 years of mentorship, of counsel offered across tables, in rooms where the decisions being made had weight and consequence, of a voice at his shoulder that he'd trusted because trust was what you extended to family, because family was the one category he'd believed sat outside the calculations. He picked up the drive. Why the boy? He said. Not accusation. Genuine. If it wasn't your call, who gave that order? Garrett's expression shifted. Something moved across his face that he controlled quickly, but not quickly enough. The Vasquez family has been running their own operation parallel to mine. I used their resources for certain logistical elements of this. I underestimated how independently they'd act once they understood the leverage available. Where are they now? In this building, Garrett said. Upper level, north end, 4 men. They came for you specifically. Not for the boy, not for the exposure filing. They want you, Adrian, personally. The collapsed engagement cost them more than money. Adrian was already turning. His hand found Claire's arm. We need to go up and out the way we came in. Now. I'll stay, Garrett said. Adrian looked at him. The federal team needs someone to walk them through the physical evidence in this building, Garrett said. And the Vasquez people won't move on me. I'm still useful to them until the filing processes, which they don't yet know has already happened. He paused. Go. Take your family. The word landed in the room, and nobody acknowledged it, and everybody felt it. They went up the stairs fast. Claire first with Noah, Adrian behind them, no longer caring about the noise, because noise didn't matter anymore against the sound of the approaching vehicles outside. Through the main shed floor, through the rotted boards on the east wall, out into the cold and the dark and the snow-covered yard. Carver was there. He was leaning against the east wall of the shed with his left hand pressed to his right side and his face the color of old concrete. But he was standing, and when he saw Adrian, his expression did something complicated and then simplified. Grazed, he said before Adrian could ask. I'm fine. Donovan got them off me. He looked at Noah. The kid okay? I'm okay, Noah said. Good. Carver looked at Claire. Ma'am, there are federal vehicles coming up the main road. Donovan flagged them in. Claire looked at the sky to the east, where the helicopter's light was now visible. A moving star coming down toward them through the dark. She looked at Adrian. She looked at Noah. She put her hand on the back of her son's head and held it there for a moment. Then she looked at Adrian again, and something passed between them that wasn't a decision exactly, because decisions implied that the alternative was still available. And both of them understood by now that the alternatives had been exhausted. What passed between them was closer to an acknowledgement, the recognition of two people who had arrived at the same place by completely different roads and were now standing on the same ground for the first time. What happens now? She said. Federal processing, testimony, a long time of very unsatisfying legal procedure. He paused. And then it's over. The empire. Yes. She looked at him steadily. And you? I have legitimate holdings, he said. Real estate, 2 operating companies, a charitable foundation that was always actually charitable. It's not nothing, he paused. It's enough to build from. She was quiet for a moment. Noah had migrated slightly toward Adrian in the way that children migrate toward things they've decided are acceptable without making an announcement about it, and was standing close enough that their shoulders were almost touching, and Adrian was very carefully not reacting to this in any way that would draw attention to it. He knows, Claire said quietly. Doesn't he? Adrian looked at Noah. Noah was looking at the helicopter light coming down from the east with the focused interest of a child watching something mechanically impressive. He said without turning, I figured it out when you guys were talking in the kitchen. Claire closed her eyes for 1 second. The eyes thing, Noah said. He finally turned and looked at Adrian with his direct, unselfconscious assessment. You have the same thing with your eyes when you're thinking, like you're running a calculation. He considered this. I do that too. Mom always says it. Adrian looked at Claire. Claire looked at the sky. I wasn't going to say anything, Noah said, with the tone of a child who has given this significant thought. Because it seemed like complicated adult stuff, but... He paused. Are you? The helicopter was close now, its light sweeping across the yard, the sound of it filling everything. Adrian crouched down so he was at eye level with Noah, which put him in the snow, and the snow soaked through the knee of his pants, and he didn't notice. He looked at Noah's face, the jaw, the eyes, the slight leftward tilt when thinking. And he thought about 14 months of surveillance and 8 years of searching and 20 years of an empire built on the systematic avoidance of anything that could be held against him. And here was the thing that had always been true underneath all of it, standing in a mining yard in Montana in the snow. "Yeah," he said, "I am." Noah processed this with his characteristic 2-second delay. Then he said, "Okay," and turned back to watch the helicopter land, and that was, apparently, that. The federal team came in fast and organized. 6 agents from the main road, 2 from the helicopter, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who had been briefed in transit and knew their objectives. Carver directed them to the building entrance. Adrian stood up from the snow and handed the flash drive and his own phone to the lead agent and answered the first round of questions with the focused cooperation of a man who had made a decision and was not second-guessing it. It took 4 hours. They processed the scene, secured Garrett and the 2 men in the lower level, and found the Vasquez contingent on the upper floor exactly where Garrett had said they'd be. 4 men who gave up without incident when they understood the tactical situation, which suggested they'd been told their Vasquez organization was already under federal scrutiny through a parallel investigation that had nothing to do with tonight. Garrett had been thorough. The man had spent years building both the trap and the exit from the trap simultaneously, and the sheer architectural patience of it was something Adrian would not be able to think about without a complex mixture of fury and reluctant admiration for a very long time. Mila was picked up in New York at 4 in the morning. She didn't fight it. She had apparently also been expecting it. Claire sat in the back of one of the federal SUVs with Noah asleep against her shoulder for most of the 4 hours. And when the agents needed her statement, she gave it clearly and completely and without editorializing, and when they were done, she asked when they could leave and was told they could leave now. Adrian walked them to Claire's car, which Donovan had retrieved from her house and brought to the complex entrance. The sky was beginning to suggest the distant possibility of morning somewhere far to the east. Not light yet, just the faintest recession of the darkest dark, the sky deciding to begin the process without committing to it. Noah was 3/4 asleep. Claire got him into the back seat and buckled him and stood up and looked at Adrian across the roof of the car, and between them was the cold and the quiet, and everything that had happened in the last 9 hours, which sat in the air with the particular density of events that haven't finished becoming what they're going to become. "The school," she said. "The book fair is tomorrow." "Today," he said. "It's already today." She looked at him. "Are you going to be in Silver Creek?" "For a while. There's testimony, depositions." He paused. "After that," he stopped. He didn't fill in the after that with anything, because the after that was genuinely open in a way that nothing in his life had been genuinely open for 20 years, and he wasn't yet sure what to do with the openness except stand in it and not flinch. "After that," she said carefully, "you could stay." He looked at her across the roof of the car. "Not because of the legal process," she said. "Not because it's convenient." She held his gaze with the directness that was the most consistent thing about her. Through 8 years and a blown-apart past and a mountain in the dark, the eyes always straight, always honest. "Because there's a kid in my back seat who figured out in a kitchen at 2 in the morning that you're his father and said okay and went back to watching the helicopter, and that's either the most well-adjusted thing I've ever seen or the beginning of a very long conversation that he deserves to have with both of us present." Adrian's hands were on the roof of the car. The metal was cold through his gloves. "That's a reason for me to stay." "It's one of them," she said. The sky in the east had made its decision and was now fully committed to the process of becoming morning, a gray-blue light spreading slowly across the ridgeline and touching the peaks of the mountains that cupped Silver Creek in their frozen hands. He thought about the things that had been burned in the last 12 hours. The empire, the architecture of 20 years, Mila's loyalty, Garrett's long patience, the Vasquez alliance, the shell companies and the retainers and the intercepted letters and the fake engagement and all the elaborate machinery of manipulation that had been running under both their lives without their knowledge. He thought about what was left when you removed all of that, what the ground looked like when you cleared it. It looked like a school gymnasium full of books. It looked like a kid who read above his grade level and had his father's eyes. It looked like a woman standing across a car roof in the Montana dawn, telling him there were reasons, plural, for him to stay. "The Horizon Learning Center," he said. She blinked. "What?" There's a decommissioned schoolhouse on the south end of town. I saw it on the drive in. The county listing shows it's been vacant for 12 years. He'd looked it up at 2 a.m. during one of the 30-second windows while Mila was running searches, filed it in the back of his mind as the kind of information you store without knowing why. The legitimate foundation holdings are enough to acquire it and fund a full restoration. Tuition-free if it's structured correctly. She looked at him for a long moment. "You looked up a schoolhouse," she said. "I look things up." "In the middle of all of this, you looked up a schoolhouse." "It was a 2-minute search," he said. "Claire." "What?" "There are reasons," he said, plural, "for me to stay." The morning light came over the ridge and touched the yard and the mountains and the roof of the car between them, and somewhere in the back seat Noah shifted in his sleep and resettled without waking. And Claire Bennett looked at Adrian Knox across 7 years of absence and 8 years of silence in one very long night, and made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a breath, but lived in the space between them. "Then stay," she said. He walked around the car and got in the passenger seat, and she got in the driver's seat, and she started the engine, and the heat came on. And they drove back down the mountain toward Silver Creek as the sun came up over the ridge and turned the snow every color it knew how to be. And in the back seat, Noah slept the uncomplicated sleep of a child who had processed the essential information and filed it correctly and was done with the night. And ahead of them, the town appeared in the valley below, small and ordinary and exactly what it was. And that was enough. That was, it turned out, more than enough.